Vishnu Vishnupad Ashtatarashitashmad Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Gosai Maharaj Srila Gurudev Ki Jai. Nitila Vishnu Vishnupad Ashtatarashitashmad Srila Bhaktivedanta Vaman Gosai Maharaj Ki Jai. Nitila Vishnu Vishnupad Ashtatarashitashmad Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Nitila Vishnu Vishnupad Ashtatarashitashmad Srila Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Gosai Maharaj Ki Jai. Nitila Vishnu Vishnupad Ashtatarashitashmad Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Gosai Prabhupada Ki Jai. Nitila Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam Srila Gokshara Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Nitila Srila Satchidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur Ki Jai. Nitila Vaishnav Sarvabhauma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Shri Rupano Gauriya Guru Varga Ki Jai. Shri Rup Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jeev Gopal Bhattadash Raghunath Shar Gosai Prabhu Ki Jai. Shri Sarup Damodar Rai Ramanandari Shri Gaur Parshad Vrinda Ki Jai. Namachay Shri Hari Das Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Kshetra Mandala Gaura Mandala Vraja Mandala Mathura Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Sarva Abhishta Pradata Giriraj Maharaj Ki Jai. Shri Radha Kund Shama Kund Ki Jai. Shri Muna Devi Ganga Devi Ki Jai. Shri Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki Jai. Shri Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Shri Purnamasi Yogamaya Ki Jai. Shri Gopeshwar Mahadev Ki Jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Samagata Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shinitai Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Gaur. Shri Guru Purnima Ki Jai. It's today for us here. Yeah, Shri Guru Purnima Titi Ki Jai. Shri Vyasa Puja Ki Jai. Shri Vyasa Devar Avirbhav Titi Ki Jai. Shri Chaturmasa Vrat Ki Jai. Srila Sanatan Goswami Ki Jai. Tadiya Shubhatirabav Titi Ki Jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Gaur. Dandavat Pranams. Rup Manjari Didi, Prajumna Prabhu, Mantramurti Mataji, Ganga Didi, Gargaraj Ji. Dandavat Pranams to all of you. Hari Bol. Oh, you're speaking tomorrow, Prajumna Prabhu? That's great. And awesome. Okay, let me share my screen. I'm feeling a little sick today. Like a bit of a fever and cough, so I'm a little bit out of it. I don't know why I'm sick, but anyhow. Yeah, last night. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Radhikaya Priyatmane Shri Śrīmad-Bhakti Vedanta Narayaniti Namine. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Śrīmate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratishe Namaha. Kuruve Gaura Chandraya Radhikaya Tadalaya Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tarbhaktaya Namo Namaha. Yam Pravrajantam Anupetam Apeta Krityam Dvaipayano Virahakatara Ajuhava Putreti Tanmayataya Taravo Bhinedu Stang Sarva Bhuta Hridaya Munimanatosmi. Narayanam Namaskrityam Narang Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirayet. Shrinvatang Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Ridantasto Yabadrani Vedunoti Suritsatam. Nashta Praishvavadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavattutama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtaki. Tavai vasmi na jivami tvaya vina. Iti vigyaya radhe tvam nayamam charanantikam. Bhaktya vihina aparada lakshay Sheptashtakama ditaranga madhe Kripa mai tvam sharanam prapanna Vrinde namaste charana ravindam Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. I think in our shloka group, what the heck? Whoa, that's weird. Just learned a new shortcut. Let's see though. Does it do it again? Huh. That's so bizarre. Let me just write one thing though. That's so weird. How come my normal shortcut isn't working? Dandavat Pranam Sangazer 8. I don't know what your devotee name is, but one second. I just. Okay. Sorry. Okay. I'm a bit spaced out now, so that's why, because I'm feeling sick, so that's why I need to be extra. Okay. Conversation between Maharaj Rahugaṇa and Jaḍa Bharata. So in the previous chapter, we read all of this, but I'm just going through it again quickly. Rahugaṇa thanks Jaḍa Bharata and inquires further. He says, I offer my respects unto you. My vision is tainted with pride, but your words are like cooling waters, nectar, or medicine. Please simplify your instructions so that I can understand. Then Jaḍa Bharata establishes the falsity of the material world. He says, everything is a transformation of the earth, but in illusion you are thinking yourself to be the king. Your rule is irreligious. The earth, which is the cause of all bodies, is made of atoms, and which are also all impermanent. Material nature has created everything in the universe. And then he explains the Lord's qualities, his abode, and bhakti are truth. So everything is temporary, false. If something is not, like a dream is, a dream happened, but it's false because, it's not actually real because it's just going to be over, even though it's something that you do experience. But so in the same way, but the Lord's qualities, his abode and bhakti are the truth. Non-dual knowledge is Lord Vasudeva. One can realize the Lord by bathing in the dust of the pure devotees. The mind becomes fixed. Let's read from this point, because this is such a beautiful shloka. That's where we started off with yesterday. Okay, so non-dual knowledge is devoid of material contamination and gives liberation. It is the all-pervading Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Learned scholars describe it as the Supreme Person, Vasudeva. How is that Vasudeva attained? My dear Rahugaṇa, one cannot realize the absolute truth by concentration of the mind, by sacrifices, accepting sannyas, following the rules of householder life, studying the Vedas, or performing austerities in water, fire, or sun. Without smearing one's body with the dust of the lotus feet of great devotees, it is not possible. Vina mahatpada rajobhishekam. Who are the greatest devotees mentioned in verse 12? In this verse here? Where there are great devotees, there's discussion of the Lord's qualities, forms, and pastimes, and there's no discussion on material subjects like politics and sociology. By constantly hearing such topics respectfully, even a person who wants to merge into Brahman abandons this idea and gradually becomes attached to the service of Vasudeva. Rahugaṇa might have asked, "Who are you, so mercifully giving me knowledge to a great offender like me?" Then Jaḍa Bharata reveals his history. "Previously, I was a king named Bharat, detached from all material activities, both seen and heard. I was fully engaged in the Lord's service, but was thwarted in my goal due to affection for a deer. Thus I became a deer in the next life. Due to my past service to Lord Krishna, I could remember my past life even in the deer body. Fearing material association, I wandered about unnoticed." The power of devotee association and Krishna Katha. By detachment from matter and attachment to devotees, one gains the sword of knowledge by which one can cut illusion. By hearing and speaking about Lord Hari, one revives his dormant Krishna consciousness and attains the Lord. What verse did we read up to yesterday? Let me just check really quick. We read up to verse 6. Okay. So in the previous chapter, verse 16, that was the last verse, right? Yeah. So in the last verse of the previous chapter, he mentioned the crossing of material existence. Now in this chapter 13, he describes the path for this and its traveler. Note. Hey, they made a mistake here. Oh, no, they didn't. So in this chapter up to verse 19, gives an allegorical description of a merchant entering a forest. Upon Parikshit Maharaja's request, Shukadev Goswami gives its direct meaning in the next chapter, verses 1 to 41. Okay, so now we're going to get just an allegorical story, but then in the next chapter it's going to be explained what the analogy means. The first 41 verses in the next chapter. Both allegory and meaning have been depicted side by side in the following table. Entries in corresponding colors indicate like terms. Okay, so I think we can go through this when we go through chapter 14. But I'll just read these ones on the left side. So, Jaḍa Bharata says, a merchant enters a forest to acquire goods in order to sell them later for profit, but he cannot find happiness. 6 plunderers plundered the misguided merchant. Then the jackals plunder the inattentive merchant. There are dense bowers composed of thickets of bushes, grass, and creepers. In these bowers, he is always disturbed by biting mosquitoes. Sometimes he sees an imaginary palace. Sometimes he is bewildered by seeing a glowing ghost, which looks like a meteor. His intelligence is victimized by home, wealth, relatives, and so forth. He runs from one place to another in search of success. Sometimes his eyes are covered by the dust of a whirlwind. Thus blinded, he cannot see where to go or what he is doing. To acquire water, he runs after a mirage. Sometimes his heart is pained by hearing the sounds of owls and invisible crickets. I listen to owl cricket sounds sometimes when I go to sleep, like on my speaker. Anyways, sometimes he takes shelter of impious trees that have no fruits or flowers. He jumps into a shallow river. Sometimes he begs food from others. He suffers from the burning heat of a forest fire. He becomes sad because his wealth is plundered by yakshas. Sometimes he imagines a palatial city. He enters it. Oh, this is what we're reading. We read it. Yeah, so okay. We ended with, he becomes sad because his wealth is plundered by yakshas. Okay, let's... 7. Shurarhrita svakvachak nirvinacheta Shochan vimohyan opayati kashmalam Kvachit chagandarva puram pravishta pramodate nirvritavan muhurtam. Sometimes, being defeated or plundered by a superior, powerful agent, a living entity loses all his possessions. He then becomes very morose, and lamenting their loss, he sometimes becomes unconscious. Sometimes he imagines a great palatial city in which he desires to live happily with his family members and riches. He thinks himself fully satisfied if this is possible. But such so-called happiness continues only for a moment. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The word Gandharva is very significant in this verse. Sometimes, in the forest, a very big castle appears, and this is called a castle in the air. Whoa! I have to share this with Jaigopal because he's working on making the temple in the sky. Anyways, never mind. Actually, this castle does not exist anywhere, but in one's imagination. This is called Gandharva Pura. In the material forest, the conditioned soul sometimes contemplates great castles and skyscrapers, and he wastes his energy for such things, hoping to live in them very peacefully with his family forever. However, the laws of nature do not allow this. When he enters such castles, he temporarily thinks that he is very happy, even though his happiness is impermanent. His happiness may last for a few years, but because the owner of the castle has to leave the castle at the time of death, everything is eventually lost. This is the way of worldly transactions. Such happiness is described by Vidyapati as the happiness one derives upon seeing a drop of water in the desert. The desert is heated by scorching sunshine, and if we want to reduce the desert temperature, we need huge amounts of water, millions and millions of gallons. What effect will one drop have? Water certainly has value, but one drop of water cannot reduce the heat of the desert. In this material world, everyone is ambitious, but the heat is very scorching. What will an imaginary castle in the air do to help? Srila Vidyapati has therefore sung, Tatala saikate vari bindu sama sutamita ramani samaje. The happiness of family life, friends, and society is compared to a drop of water in the scorching desert. The entire material world is busy trying to attain happiness because happiness is the prerogative of the living being. Unfortunately, due to falling in contact with the material world, the living entity simply struggles for existence. Even if one becomes happy for a while, a very powerful enemy may plunder everything. There are many instances in which big businessmen suddenly become paupers in the street. Yet the nature of material existence is such that foolish people are attracted to these transactions, and they forget the real business of self-realization. Chalan kvachit kantaka sharkarangrir nagarurukshur vimana ivaste pade pade bhyantara vaninardita kautumbika krudhyati vajanaya. Sometimes, the merchant in the forest wants to climb the hills and mountains, but due to insufficient footwear, his feet are pricked by small stone fragments and by thorns on the mountain. Being pricked by them, he becomes very aggrieved. Sometimes, a person who is very attached to his family becomes overwhelmed with hunger, and due to his miserable condition, he becomes furious with his family members. Purport. The ambitious conditioned soul wants to be very happy in this material world with his family, but he is compared to a traveler in the forest who desires to climb a hill full of thorns and small stones. As stated in the previous verse, the happiness derived from society, friendship, and love is like a drop of water in the scorching heat of the desert. One may want to become very great and powerful in society, but this is like attempting to climb a hill full of thorns. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur compares one's family to high mountains. Becoming happy in their association is like a hungry man's endeavoring to climb a mountain full of thorns. Almost 99.9% of the population is unhappy in family life. despite all the attempts being made to satisfy the family members. In the Western countries, due to dissatisfaction of the family members, there is actually no family life. There are many cases of divorce, and out of dissatisfaction, the children leave the protection of their parents. Especially in this age of Kali, family life is being reduced. Everyone is becoming self-centered because that is the law of nature. Even if one has sufficient money to maintain a family, the situation is such that no one is happy in family life. Consequently, according to the Varnashram institution, one has to retire from family life in middle age. Pancha shordvam vanam vrajet. One should voluntarily retire from family life at the age of 50 and go to Vrindavan or a forest. This is recommended by Srila Prahlad Maharaj in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam 755. Tatsadu manye suravarya dehinam sada samudvigna dhyam asadgrahat hitvatmapatam grihamandakupam vanam gato yad dharmashrayeta. There is no benefit in transferring from one forest to another. One must go to the Vrindavan forest and take shelter of Govinda. That will make one happy. The International Society for Krishna Consciousness is therefore constructing a Krishna Balaram temple to invite its members as well as outsiders to come and live peacefully in a spiritual atmosphere. That will help one become elevated to the transcendental world and return home back to Godhead. Another sentence in this verse is very significant. Kautumbika krudati vaijanaya. When one's mind is disturbed in so many ways, he satisfies himself by becoming angry with his poor wife and children. The wife and children are naturally dependent on the father, but the father, being unable to maintain the family properly, becomes mentally distressed and therefore chastises the family members unnecessarily. As stated in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam 12.2.9, Achina dara dravina yasyanti giri kananam. Being disgusted with family life, one separates from the family by divorce or by some other means. If one has to separate, why not separate willingly? Systematic separation is better than forced separation. Forced separation cannot make anyone happy, but by mutual consent or by the Vedic arrangement, one must separate from his family affairs at a certain age and fully depend on Krishna. This makes one's life successful. Kvachin nigirna jagarahina jana na vaiti kinchir vipine pavidha dashta swashete kwa chadanda shukar andondakupe patitastamisre. The conditioned soul in the material forest is sometimes swallowed by a python or crushed. At such a time, he is left lying in the forest like a dead person, devoid of consciousness and knowledge. Sometimes other poisonous snakes bite him. Being blind to his consciousness, he falls down into a dark well of hellish life with no hope of being rescued. Purport. When one becomes unconscious due to being bitten by a snake, one cannot understand what is taking place outside the body. This unconscious condition is the condition of deep sleep. Similarly, the conditioned soul is actually sleeping on the lap of the illusory energy. Bhaktivinoda Thakur has sung, Kota nidra jao maya pishachira kole. O living entity, how long will he sleep in this condition on the lap of the illusory energy? People do not understand that they are actually sleeping in this material world, being devoid of knowledge of spiritual life. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore says, Enichiyo shadi maya nashibara lagi harinama maha mantra lao mi magi. I have brought medicine to awaken every living being from perpetual sleep. Please receive the holy name of the Lord, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, and awaken. The Katha Upanishad 1.3.14 also says, Uttishta Jagrata Prapya Varan Nibodhata. O living entity, you are sleeping in this material world. Please get up and take advantage of your human form of life. The sleeping condition means loss of all knowledge. In Bhagavad Gita 2.69, it is also said, Yanisha sarva bhutanam tasyam jagarti samyami. What is night for all beings is the time of awakening for the self-controlled. Even in the higher planets, everyone is under the spell of the illusory energy. No one is really interested in the real values of life. The sleeping condition, called Kala Sarpa, the time factor, the snake of time, Sarpa means snake, right? Keeps the conditioned soul in a state of ignorance, and therefore pure consciousness is lost. In the forest, there are many blind wells, and if one falls down in one, there is no chance of being rescued. In a state of sleep, one remains perpetually bitten by some animals, especially snakes. Karhi smachit kshudra rasan vichingvangsh tanmakshikabir vyatito vimana tatrati kritrat pratilabdhamano palar vilumpantatatam tatonye. Sometimes, in order to have a little insignificant sex enjoyment, one searches after debauched women. In this attempt, one is insulted and chastised by the women's kinsmen. This is like going to take honey from a beehive and being attacked by the bees. Sometimes, after spending lots of money, one may acquire another woman for some extra sense enjoyment. Unfortunately, the object of sense enjoyment, the woman, is taken away or kidnapped by another debauchee. Purport. In a great forest, honeycombs are very important. People often go there to collect honey from the combs, and sometimes the bees attack and punish them. In human society, those who are not Krishna conscious remain in the forests of material life simply for the honey of sex life. Such debauchees are not at all satisfied with one wife. They want many women. Day after day, with great difficulty, they try to secure such women, and sometimes, while trying to taste this kind of honey, one is attacked by a woman's kinsman and chastised very heavily. By bribing others, one may secure another woman for enjoyment, yet another debauchee may kidnap her or offer her something better. This woman hunting is going on in the forests of the material world, sometimes legally and sometimes illegally. Consequently, in this Krishna consciousness movement, the devotees are forbidden to have illicit sex. Thus they avoid so many difficulties. One should remain satisfied with one woman, being duly married. One can satisfy one's lusty desires with his wife without creating disturbances in society and being punished for doing so. Kvachit chatsita tapavata varsha pratikriyam kartum anisha aste kvachin mito vipanamyacha kinchir vidvesham richat tutavita. Sometimes the living entity is busy counteracting the natural disturbances of freezing cold, scorching heat, strong wind, excessive rainfall, and so forth. When he is unable to do so, he becomes very unhappy. Sometimes he is cheated in business transactions, one after another. In this way, by cheating, living entities create enmity among themselves. Purport. This is an example of the struggle for existence, that attempts to counteract the onslaught of material nature. This creates enmity in society, and consequently, society is filled with envious people. One person is envious of another, and this is the way of the material world. The Krishna consciousness movement aims at creating an atmosphere of non-envy. Of course, it is not possible for everyone to become Krishna conscious, but the Krishna consciousness movement can create an exemplary society wherein there is no envy. Kvachit kshina dhanastu tasmin shayasanastana viharahina yachan parad apratilabdha kama parakya drishtir labate vamanam. On the forest path of material existence, sometimes a person is without wealth and due to this does not have proper home, bed, or sitting place, nor proper family enjoyment. He therefore goes to beg money from others, but when his desires are not fulfilled by begging, he wants to borrow or steal the property of others. Thus he is insulted in society. Purport: the principles of beg, borrow, or steal are very appropriate in this material world. When one is in want, he begs, borrows, or steals. If begging is unsuccessful, he borrows. If he cannot pay, he steals. And when he is caught, he is insulted. This is the law of material existence. No one can live here very honestly. Therefore, by trickery, cheating, begging, borrowing, or stealing, one tries to satisfy his senses. Thus, no one in this material world is living peacefully. Anyonyavitta vyatishanga vreda vairānubandho vivahan mitascha advanyamushmin urukritravitta badhopasagar viharan vipanna. Due to monetary transactions, relationships become very strained and end in enmity. Sometimes the husband and wife walk on the path of material progress, and to maintain their relationship, they work very hard. Sometimes, due to scarcity of money or due to diseased conditions, they are embarrassed and almost die. Purport: in this material world, there are many transactions between peoples and societies, as well as between nations. But gradually these end in enmity between the two parties. Similarly, in a marriage relationship, monetary transactions are sometimes overpowered by the dangerous conditions of material life. One then becomes diseased or monetarily embarrassed. In the modern age, most countries have developed economically, but due to business exchanges, relationships seem to be strained. Finally, wars are declared between nations, and as a result of these upheavals, there is destruction all over the world, and people suffer heavily. Tangstan vipannan sahitatra tatra vihaya jatam parigrihya sarta avartate dyapi nakashchiratra viradvana param upaiti yogam. My dear king, on the forest path of material life, first a person is bereft of his father and mother, and after their death, he becomes attached to his newly born children. In this way, he wanders on the path of material progress and is eventually embarrassed. Nonetheless, no one knows how to get out of this, even up to the moment of death. Purport: in this material world, family life is an institution of sex. Yanmaitunadi grihamedi sukam. Through sex, the father and mother beget children, and the children get married and go down the same path of sexual life. After the death of the father and mother, the children get married and beget their own children. Thus, generation after generation, these things go on in the same way without anyone's attaining liberation from the embarrassment of material life. No one accepts the spiritual processes of knowledge and renunciation, which end in bhakti yoga. Actually, human life is meant for jnana and vairagya, knowledge and renunciation. Through these, one can attain the platform of devotional service. Unfortunately, people in this age avoid the association of liberated people. They avoid sadhusanga and continue in their stereotyped way of family life. Thus, they are embarrassed by the exchange of money and sex. Manasvino nirjita de gajendra mameti sarve bhuvi baddha vaira mride shairan natutad vrajanti yanyasta dando gatavairo bhyati. There were and are many political and social heroes who have conquered enemies of equal power. Yet due to their ignorance in believing that the land is theirs, they fight one another, and lay down their lives in battle. They are not able to take up the spiritual path accepted by those in the renounced order. Although they are big heroes and political leaders, they cannot take to the path of spiritual realization. Purport. Big political leaders might be able to conquer equally powerful political enemies, but unfortunately, they cannot subdue their strong senses, the enemies that always accompany them. Not being able to conquer these nearby enemies, they simply try to conquer other enemies, and ultimately, they die in the struggle for existence. They do not take to the path of spiritual realization or become sannyasis. Sometimes these big leaders take up the guise of a sannyasi and call themselves Mahatmas, but their only business is conquering their political enemies. Because they spoil their lives with the illusion of this is my land and my family, they cannot progress spiritually and attain liberation from the clutches of Maya. Prasajati kvapi lata bujashayas tarashaya vyakta pada dijaspriha kvachit kadachid dhari chakratastrasan sakyam vidhate bakakanka gridharai. Sometimes the living entity in the forest of material existence takes shelter of creepers and desires to hear from the chirping of the birds in those creepers. Being afraid of roaring lions in the forest, he makes friends with cranes. What's that? I don't know what a heron is. Herons and vultures. A heron is a large fish-eating wading bird with long legs and a long S-shaped neck and a long pointed bill. Okay. Purport. In the forests of the material world, there are many animals and birds, trees, and creepers. Sometimes the living entity wants to take shelter of the creepers. In other words, he wants to be happy by being embraced by the creeper-like arms of his wife. Within the creepers, there are many chirping birds. This indicates that he wants to satisfy himself by hearing the sweet voice of his wife. In old age, however, he sometimes becomes afraid of imminent death, which is compared to a roaring lion. To save himself from the lion's attack, he takes shelter of some bogus swamis, yogis, incarnations, pretenders, and cheaters. So-called incarnations, obviously. Being misled by the illusory energy in this way, he spoils his life. It is said, Harim vina mrittim nataranti. No one can be saved from the imminent danger of death without taking shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The word Hari indicates the lion, as well as the Supreme Lord. To be saved from the hands of Hari, the lion of death, one must take shelter of the Supreme Hari, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Hey, that should be lowercase and italicized, this Hari right here. Anyways. People with a poor fund of knowledge take shelter of non-devotee cheaters and pretenders in order to be saved from the clutches of death. In the forest of the material world, the living entity first of all wants to be very happy by taking shelter of the creeper-like arms of his wife and hearing her sweet voice. Later, he sometimes takes shelter of so-called gurus and sadhus who are like crane, herons, and vultures. Thus he is cheated both ways by not taking shelter of the Supreme Lord. Tarvanchito hangsa kulam samavishan arochayan shilam upaiti vanaran tajatirasena sunirvritendriya parasparo dvikshana vismritarvadi. Being cheated by them, the living entity in the forests of the material world tries to give up the association of these so-called yogis, swamis, and incarnations and come to the association of real devotees. But due to misfortune, he cannot follow the instructions of the spiritual master or advanced devotees. Therefore, he gives up their company and again returns to the association of monkeys, who are simply interested in sense gratification and women. He derives satisfaction by associating with sense gratifiers and enjoying sex and intoxication. In this way, he spoils his life simply by indulging in sex and intoxication. Looking into the faces of other sense gratifiers, he becomes forgetful and thus approaches death. Purport. Sometimes a foolish person becomes disgusted with bad association and comes to the association of devotees and Brahmins and takes initiation from a spiritual master. As advised by the spiritual master, he tries to follow the regulative principles, but due to misfortune, he cannot follow the instructions of the spiritual master. He therefore gives up the company of devotees and goes to associate with simian people. Does that mean like... Oh, okay. Simian means relating to or affecting apes or monkeys. Okay. So monkey-like people. He goes to associate with monkey-like people who are simply interested in sex and intoxication. Those who are so-called spiritualists are compared to monkeys. Outwardly, monkeys sometimes resemble sadhus because they live naked in the forests and pick fruits, but their only desire is to keep many female monkeys and enjoy sex life. Sometimes so-called spiritualists seeking a spiritual life come to associate with Krishna-conscious devotees, but they cannot execute the regulative principles or follow the path of spiritual life. Consequently, they leave the association of devotees and go to associate with sense gratifiers, who are compared to monkeys. Again, they revive their sex and intoxication, and looking at one another's faces, they are thus satisfied. In this way, they pass their lives up to the point of death. Trumeshurang syan sutadara vatsalo vyavaya dino vivasha sabhandane kvachit pramadar girikandare patan valingrihitva gajabhita astita. When the living entity becomes exactly like a monkey, jumping from one branch to another, he remains in the tree of household life without any profit but sex. Thus he is kicked by his wife just like the he-ass. Unable to gain release, he remains helplessly in that position. Sometimes he falls victim to an incurable disease, which is like falling into a mountain cave. He becomes afraid of death, which is like the elephant in the back of that cave, and he remains stranded, grasping at the twigs and branches of a creeper. Purport: the precarious condition of a householder's life is described herein. A householder's life is full of misery, and the only attraction is sex with the wife who kicks him during sexual intercourse, just as the she-ass does her mate. Due to continuous sex life, he falls victim to many incurable diseases. At that time, being afraid of death, which is like an elephant, he remains hanging from the twigs and branches of the tree, just like a monkey. Ata kantanchit savimukta apada punascha sartam pravishat arindama advanyanmusmin ajaya niveshito brahmanjano dhyapi naveda kaschana. O killer of enemies, Maharaj Rahugaṇa, if the conditioned soul somehow or other gets out of his dangerous position, he again returns to his home to enjoy sex life, for that is the way of attachment. Thus, under the spell of the Lord's material energy, he continues to loiter in the forest of material existence. He does not discover his real interest, even at the point of death. Purport: this is the way of material life. When one is captured by sexual attraction, he becomes implicated in so many ways and cannot understand the real aim of life. Therefore, Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam 7.531 says, Nate vidu svarta gatim hi Vishnum. Generally, people do not understand the ultimate goal of life. As stated in the Vedas, Om Tad Vishnu Paramam Param Sada Pashanti Suraya. Those who are spiritually advanced simply look to the lotus feet of Vishnu. The conditioned soul, however, not being interested in reviving his relationship with Vishnu, becomes captivated by material activities and remains in everlasting bondage, being misled by so-called leaders. Rahugaṇa tvam apihyadvanosya sanyastadanda krita bhuta maitra asajjitatma harisevaya shitam jnanasemadaya tarati param. My dear King Rahugaṇa, you are also a victim of the external energy, being situated on the path of attraction to material pleasure. So that you may become an equal friend to all living entities, I now advise you to give up your kingly position and the rod by which you punish criminals. Give up attraction to the sense objects, and take up the sword of knowledge sharpened by devotional service. Then you'll be able to cut the hard knot of illusory energy and cross to the other side of the ocean of nescience. Purport. In Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna compares the material world to a tree of illusion from which one must cut oneself free. Narupamasyeha tato palabhyate nanto chadrir nachasam pratishta ashvatamenam saviruddhamulam asanga shastrena dridena chitva tata padam tat parimargitavyam yasmin gata na nivartanti bhuya tam eva ujhadyam purusham prapade yata pravritti shishta prasrita purani. The real form of this tree cannot be perceived in this world. No one can understand where it ends, where it begins, or where its foundation is. But with determination, one must cut down this tree with the weapon of detachment. So doing, one must seek shelter. One must seek that place from which, having once gone, one never returns, and there surrender to that Supreme Personality of Godhead from whom everything has begun and in whom everything is abiding since time immemorial. Bhagavad Gita chapter 15, verses 3 to 4. What verse are we reading up to? Are we finishing this chapter today? Oh. We're finishing with this verse. Okay. Rajavacha aho nrijanma kilab janma shobhanam kim janma bhistva parer apyamushmin nayadrishi kesha yasha kritatmanam mahatmanam va prachura samagama. King Rahugaṇa said, "This birth as a human being is the best of all. Even birth among the demigods and the heavenly planets is not as glorious as birth as a human being on this earth. What is the use of the exalted position of a demigod? In the heavenly planets, due to profuse material comforts, there is no possibility of associating with devotees." Purport. Human birth is a great opportunity for self-realization. One may take birth in a high planetary system among the demigods, but due to the profusion of material comforts, one cannot gain release from material bondage. Even on this earth, those who are very opulent do not generally care to take to Krishna consciousness. An intelligent person actually interested in getting freed from the material clutches must associate with pure devotees. By such association, one can gradually become detached from the material attraction of money and women. Money and women are the basic principles of material attachment. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore advised those who are actually serious about returning back to Godhead to give up money and women in order to be fit He advised them to give up money and women in order to be fit to enter the kingdom of God. Money and women can be fully utilized in the service of the Lord, but one who can utilize them in this way can become freed from material bondage. Satam prasangam mamavirya samvido bhavanti hritkarna rasayana kata. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam 3:25-25. Only in the association of devotees can one relish the glorification of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Just through a little association with a pure devotee, one can become successful in his journey back to Godhead. Alright, and so tomorrow, oh wow. Wait, no. How long does this chapter go on for? Rahugaṇa expresses his gratitude. Alright, so we'll read the next 5 verses tomorrow for this chapter. Oh, something I forgot to mention is today is there's a good kind of beg, borrow, and stealing. That's, I think, an example of good beg, borrowing, and stealing. What is it though? Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur writes, Kinibo lutibo hari nama ras. Nama rase mati hoibo vivash. I will either purchase the holy name, or lutibo, or I'll steal it. Basically, I'll beg, borrow, or steal to get that harinam. And nama rase mati hoibo vivash. And I'll become completely absorbed, lost in the nectar of the holy name. Rasas, yeah. Today is the day. Remember, last year I started this Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam reading on Guru Purnima. So now it's been I think I mentioned before that we've been reading for 1 year, but it's a year later because last year there was it's a month later because there was Purushottam last month. But yeah, so today by Titi is our 1st year anniversary of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam reading every day. Hi. Jai Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol. Jai Shri Guru Gauranga Gandhari Vikagiri Dhari Shri Radha Vinod Bihari Ju ki Jai, Shri Govinda Gopinath Maran Mohan Ju ki Jai, Nitila Pravishtam Vishnupa Rashata Shmad, Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Gosai Maharaj Srila Gurudev ki Jai, Nitila Pravishtam Vishnupa Rashata Shmad, Srila Bhaktivedanta Vaman Gosai Maharaj ki Jai, Nitila Pravishtam Vishnupa Rashata Shmad, Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada ki Jai, Nitila Pravishtam Vishnupa Rashata Shmad, Srila Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Gosai Maharaj ki Jai, Nitila Pravishtam Vishnupa Rashata Shmad, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Gosai Prabhupada ki Jai, Nitila Pravishta Mahabhagavat Srila Gorksharas Babaji Maharaj ki Jai, Nitila Pravishta Srila Satchidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur ki Jai, Nitila Pravishta Vaishnav Sarvabhauma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj ki Jai, Shri Rupanu Gauriya Guru Varga ki Jai, Shri Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath, actually I'll do full Guru Parampara. Srila Baldev Jibhushan Prabhu ki Jai, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur ki Jai, Shri Nartam Srinivas Ramananda Prabhu Trai ki Jai, Srila Krishna Ras Kaviraj Gosai Prabhu ki Jai, Shri Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath, Shri Jeev Gopal Patadash Raghunath, Shara Gosai Prabhu ki Jai, Shri Sarup Damodar Rai Ramanandari, Shri Gaur Parshad Vrinda ki Jai, Namachar Srila Haridas Thakur ki Jai, Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki Jai, Shri Kshetra Mandala, Gaura Mandala, Vraja Mandala, Mathura Vrindavan Dham ki Jai, Sarva Abhishta Pradata Giriraj Maharaj ki Jai, Shri Radha Kund Shama Kund ki Jai, Shri Muna Devi Ganga Devi ki Jai, Shri Tulsi Maharani Vrinda Devi ki Jai, Shri Bhakti Devi ki Jai, Shri Purnamasi Yogamaya ki Jai, Shri Gopeshwar Mahadev ki Jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki Jai, Samagata Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki Jai, Shinitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol. Vrindai Tulsi Devai. Sorry, I am so spaced out. Shri Vyasa Puja Mahamahotsav ki Jai, Shri Krishna Dvaipayan Veda Vyasadev ki Jai, Tadir Shubha Avirbhav Titi ki Jai, Shri Guru Purnima Titi ki Jai, Shri Srila Gurudev ki Jai, Guru Puja ki Jai, Srila Sanatan Goswami Pada ki Jai, Tatiya Shubha Tirobhav Titi ki Jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava ki Jai, Shri Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bol, Shri Chaturmasa Vrat ki Jai. Vrindai Tulsi Devai Priyai Keshavashacha, Krishna Bhakti Pradadevi Sattvatai Namo Namaha, Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Vacha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Dandavat Pranams. Right? Haribol. See, I might read tonight. I mean, I do have a lot of things to do today, and I'm not feeling so well, so I might not read. But it is an important day, and there are really nice articles to read about Vyas Puja by my Gurudev. So I think I'm going to read tonight at 8 o'clock. So in 12 hours from now, I'll read. All right. Jai Shri Radhe. Haribol.